October 29th, 1941. Harrow School and the entire student body stood in complete silence waiting. And then he walked in 70-years-old shoulders bent from carrying the weight of the free world. Winston Churchill, the man who was holding back Hitler almost single-handedly, and everyone expected this grand speech, this magnificent oration, because Churchill was famous for his speeches. But what he said next, what he actually said, shocked everyone, because he spoke just 16 words, 16 words. That's it. And those 16 words contained the secret to leadership, to survival, to victory, to life itself. And maybe you need to hear them right now today, in whatever battle you're fighting. So let me tell you the story of how a man who failed at everything, who was rejected, humiliated, broken, how he became the one man who stood between civilization and darkness. Act 1. The Making of Failure. You want to understand Churchill. You have to understand this: he was a failure for most of his life. I mean, a complete catastrophic failure. And it started early. Age 7, sent to boarding school St. George's, where he was beaten regularly with a cane for being slow, for not fitting in, for being different. His classmates mocked him. He wet his bed from fear. He was that scared, that broken age. 12, moved to Harrow. And you know what they have at Harrow? They have these wooden panels on the walls with the names of distinguished students carved in gold. And young Winston would stare at those names, dreaming that one day maybe his name would be up there. But his grades were terrible. He barely passed anything except history and English, and his father, Randolph Churchill, this brilliant politician, this rising star, he looked at Winston with disgust, with disappointment. He told people, "My son is a dunce. He'll never amount to anything." Imagine hearing that from your father. The man whose approval you desperately want and never get. Winston later wrote, "My father never spoke to me except to criticize. Never. That's the wound that never healed." Age 18, finally got into Sandhurst Military Academy, but only on his 3rd try, and even then just barely age 18, 21, his father died, and they never reconciled. Never had that moment of connection. Winston was 21 years old and carrying a wound that would haunt him forever. But he pushed forward, became a soldier, went to Cuba, to India, to Sudan, looking for glory, looking for purpose, looking for something to prove he was worth something. And he found war. And in war, he found he wasn't afraid. While other men cowered, he charged forward, and you know why? Because he was already broken inside, already dead in some way. So what did he have to lose? Age 25. He went to South Africa, Boer. War, got captured, became a prisoner of war, but escaped, walked 300 miles through enemy territory, became famous overnight. Suddenly, Winston Churchill was a name people knew. A hero, an adventurer, age 26, elected to Parliament. Finally some success. But then the failures started piling up again. Age 40. First Lord of the Admiralty, and he pushed for the Gallipoli campaign in World War I. It was supposed to end the war, quickly, knock out the Ottoman Empire, open a path to Russia. Instead, it became a slaughter. 60,000 Allied casualties, dead, wounded, missing, and they blamed Churchill rightly. So it was his idea, his plan, his disaster, and he was fired, humiliated, destroyed. He went to France to fight in the trenches because he wanted to die, wanted a German bullet to end his shame, but it didn't come. He survived, and that's worse. Sometimes, surviving is worse than dying. ACT 2, The Wilderness Years. The 1920s and 32nds. Churchill wandered politically, what they called the wilderness years. He was in Parliament, but nobody listened to him. Nobody wanted him. He was yesterday's man, the guy who failed at Gallipoli, the guy whose judgment couldn't be trusted, and he fought this thing he called the black dog, his depression, his darkness. There were days he couldn't get out of bed, days where the weight of failure crushed him so completely that existing took all his strength. And he drank too much, smoked too much, worked too much, anything to keep the black dog away. Because if it caught him, if it really caught him, he knew he might not survive it. And here's the thing. Everyone needs to understand about Churchill. His greatest gift, his ability to face darkness, to not surrender, it came from fighting his own darkness every single day. The man who would tell Britain to never give up had to tell himself that every morning just to get out of bed, age 64, 1938, and Hitler was rising. And Churchill saw it, clearly saw what was coming, saw that this Austrian corporal with the mustache and the madness was going to plunge the world into hell, and Churchill stood in Parliament and screamed warnings, said, "We must stop him now before he gets too strong." But nobody listened. Chamberlain, the prime minister, went to Munich and gave Hitler Czechoslovakia, and came back waving that piece of paper saying peace in our time, and the crowd cheered, and Churchill sat there knowing that Chamberlain had just made war inevitable, had just given Hitler the time and resources he needed, and Churchill was alone. Everyone thought he was a warmonger, a relic obsessed with the past, wrong about everything, and maybe he was wrong. Maybe this time the old failure had finally lost it completely. That's what they thought. Act 3. The darkest hour. May 1940, and Hitler had done it blitzkrieg through Poland, through Denmark, through Norway, through Holland, through Belgium, and now France was falling. The British army trapped at Dunkirk about to be annihilated, and Chamberlain finally realized Churchill was right, resigned in disgrace, and King George VI called for Churchill and said, "You're prime minister. Now save us if you can." And Churchill was 65 years old, the age when most men retire, when they fade away, when they give up. And he was inheriting absolute catastrophe. Britain stood alone, completely alone. The United States wasn't in the war yet. Russia had a pact with Hitler. The French were about to surrender. The British army was trapped, and the German war machine was unstoppable. And here's the moment that defines everything. May 28th, 1940. War Cabinet meeting, and Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, said we should negotiate with Hitler through Mussolini. We should see what terms he'll offer. Maybe we can keep the empire if we make peace now. And Churchill looked at him and said, "If we once admit that we are beaten, we shall be beaten. We shall not be beaten." And Halifax pushed back, said, "You're being emotional, unrealistic. We can't win this. We're alone." And Churchill said, "I am convinced that every man of you would rise up and tear me down from my place if I were for one moment to contemplate parley or surrender. And here's what most people don't know. It was close. The cabinet was split. Churchill almost lost that vote. Almost Britain. Almost surrendered, almost. And everything we know today. The free world, democracy, human rights, all of it, hung on that moment, on Churchill's refusal to even consider surrender June 4th, 1940, and he gave a speech after Dunkirk where they'd miraculously evacuated 330,000 men. And he said, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender, never surrender." And the people heard those words, and something changed. They believed him. They believed this old man who'd failed at everything, who they'd written off, who they'd mocked and ignored for decades. Suddenly, he was exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. Because Churchill understood something about leadership that nobody else did. Leadership isn't about being perfect, isn't about never failing. Leadership is about getting back up, about refusing to quit, about finding one more ounce of strength when you have nothing left. Act 4. The Trial by Fire. Summer 1940. The Battle of Britain and the Luftwaffe came every day. Hundreds of German bombers trying to destroy the RAF, trying to break British will, and Churchill would go up on the roofs in London during air raids, watching the bombs fall. The city burning around him, and his security people would beg him to go to the shelter, and he'd refuse. He'd stand there watching because he needed to see. It needed to share the danger his people were facing, and one day he visited the East End after a bombing rubble. Everywhere. Homes destroyed, families killed, and the people gathered around him, and someone shouted, "Are we downhearted?" And the crowd yelled back, "No." And Churchill had tears running down his face, real tears, because he knew these people were going to make it, were going to survive Beck.